Good morning and welcome to the Watching Humans podcast. Today I am continuing to examine this phrase, stewards of the land. And let me just tell you how my day started. 5 a.m., I'm downstairs. It's still dark outside. I'm shucking corn. I'm filling up water bags. I'm loading up the vehicle, getting ready to do some work with the land. And it kind of reminded me of my youth in the rural Midwest, working on farms. You start early in the day and you get ready to do some physical labor before the rest of the day gets away from you. And there's a pretty key difference between what I was doing today and what I did back then, and what I think most people perceive as the work of stewards of the land. What is a steward of the land? What does that even mean? It sounds really positive on the surface. I don't think anyone would really be upset to be labeled as a steward of the land, even without knowing what it means. It just generally sounds like you're up to doing something pretty good. But what, in fact, does it mean? And let's take a quick look at what others say it means. So, Googling, actually the top results are a brewery called Stewards of the Land, which of course is a farm that has expanded into alcohol. Land steward, according to Wikipedia, is environmental stewardship, responsible use and protection of the natural environment through conservation and sustainable practices. Okay, and if I continue to scroll, I start to see video results, which is all videos about farmers and ranchers from what the previews are showing me. And then the news results underneath of that. Stewards of the Land profiles numerous farmers. Okay, the next one. Farmers and ranchers are stewards of the land. By its very nature, farming must go hand in hand with environmental stewardship. It takes hundreds of years for nature to create a single inch of soil. Blah, blah, blah. Next one, ranchers on the front line of conservation. Okay, you get the picture? It's pretty much all about promoting agriculture. This is what we call stewards of the land. But you go back to that definition. Responsible use and protection of the natural environment through conservation and sustainable practices. I'm sure a lot of you can already see where this is going. I have gone through a lot of changes in recent years, and I've gotten into environmental ecology, etc., and it really makes me think about what being a steward of the land means. And I've been doing it long enough that I get enough hate messages that if you're doing something for the sake of helping, if you're being merciful, if you're trying to actually contribute to nature or be compassionate toward the hardship of wildlife, etc., well, you're a pussy. Excuse the language. I'm just quoting. Generally speaking, I am a pussy of some form or other. But if I am doing it for the ultimate goal of killing something, a cow, a sheep, a pig, going hunting, or raising crops to chop them up, well, then that's all completely respectable. But if in fact your goal is to restore nature, if you're trying to rewild, if you're trying to promote native plants, if you're trying to help native animals get over the hump of the hardship, which is pretty much a never-ending hardship, particularly here in California, where we're always on fire and it's always hot. And we set a new record for heat every day and a record for extreme drought every year. And the fact that I have been acting as what I would consider a steward of the land, meaning I actually want to help the natural state of the land, Well, it sure makes me think of the mantle that ranchers and farmers get of being stewards of the land. And of course, this will take me back to Point Reyes, because boy, do those people use that phrase to try and justify every single thing they get busted for. I don't know if I need to really rip on those people in particular for this point, because as I have learned in my classes, I went back to school studying ecology, and even before that, like if you just open your eyes and read a couple of articles that aren't written by the American Cattle Association, you will learn some very sobering things. You'll have excuses to justify it, but at the end of the day, the following are true. Agriculture is the number one cause of habitat loss. Agriculture is the number one cause of species loss. Agriculture is the number one cause of species extinction. Agriculture is the number one cause of desertification. Agriculture is the number one cause of water contamination. Agriculture is the number one cause of deforestation. Agriculture is the number one cause of I can keep going and going and going. I was going to say contaminated food, but you're dealing with agriculture, which means producing food. So that kind of goes hand in hand. And, well, I guess that kind of leads to talking about the next step in this, which are the justifications, the arguments for it. It's like, oh, do you want to starve to death? I'd like to know what you suggest that we eat if you're so against farmers and ranchers. And, apparently we think that we need almost all of the planet to feed one species. It doesn't matter how many other species are out there. We just forget about all of them and the fact that they've managed to all eat and live. And our species requires the destruction of the habitat that was able to feed all of those species while maintaining healthy, functioning ecosystems. But our quote unquote stewards of the land take that habitat. And what's the number one step? What is the number one step in agriculture? Habitat conversion. Destroying habitat. You must get rid of what is there in order to replace it with your product. Of course, there's an alternative. There's the foraging. There's the enjoying the fruits that nature provides for you. But once again, you're a pussy if you do that. You're only a steward of the land if in fact you destroy habitat and then replace it with your commodity products. You must enslave other living creatures, imprison them, and keep them imprisoned until the time that you decide to slaughter them. And you must chop down forests and sensitive prairie and replace that with your annual invasive agricultural crops. Then you're a steward of the land. But if you actually try to live with nature, if you try to eat what nature has provided, well, then you're just a ridiculous liberal hippie. Not a steward of the land. Stewards of the land destroy. Stewards of the land destroy according to what we have decided means a steward of the land. And I will go back to looking at the ranchers of Point Reyes for this, because throughout history, I've read a lot of these documents in my filmmaking process in order to learn about these families. And from the very beginning, they're bragging about the sweat and the toil and the blood they've shed in order to get rid of nature and replace it with the wonderful agricultural landscape that we have today. They bragged about it because they are so single-minded, the way that most of you listening are, in that this is good and this is correct and it is acceptable. It's not nature. And You don't have to be a fan of nature, but I have a problem with you saying steward of the land and pretending that that includes nature, because it is anti-nature. Is it a building complex? Is it an apartment complex? Is it a shopping mall? No. But guess what? That doesn't automatically make it nature. The fact that we consider anything other than urban development to be habitat or the equivalent of habitat shows that we are not a smart species. We're an incredibly disconnected species. And I suffered through this during school too. We watched this TED Talk, and this dipshit gets to go on stage in front of a huge audience and talk about how, thanks to all these efforts, now this spot here will forever be pasture. And he's talking about nature conservation. Pasture is not nature. Pasture is not nature. Pasture replaced nature. Pasture, let me keep saying it until you get it. Pasture replaced nature. Pasture replaced nature. It is an industry. These are products that are grown. They don't roll out through the factory window, or at least not yet. Most of these things, even though they're organic, do end up in some sort of a processing plant. But it just because it doesn't look like an automotive assembly line does not mean that it's nature. These are plants that don't belong there. These are animals that don't belong there. They extract from the soil. They steal all the water. They got rid of all of the wildlife. Well, I guess in a few cases they keep a handful of wildlife, and then that's when these television shows come in and be like, look, we work hand in hand with nature. My God, people, pull your heads out of your ass and go take a walk for yourself through these ranches. It's a fucking shit show of desolation, weeds, manure, and maybe the next round of crops. There's no nature there except for a wily coyote. Coyotes have managed to learn how to live anywhere, so a coyote will come cruising through there hoping to find a carcass of something that a rancher killed. I don't want to go too much further with this podcast because the stewards of the land thing and the misperception of farmers and ranchers as being friendly with nature goes down a lot of holes. I just want you to try to wrap your head around the fact that step one of agriculture is to replace nature with agriculture. We weren't satisfied with what nature had to provide. We came in and decided, oh, fuck these trees, fuck this river, fuck this functioning, healthy ecosystem. My granddad did this over in a different continent, so that's what we're going to do here. I mean, seriously, that's the core of it. That's what you're proud of. We don't know anything else. We don't know better. I don't know why everyone has that accent. I guess it's because of where I grew up, and those fucking ignorant people are just burned into my brain forever. Don't get me wrong. I learned to think the way that they did too. I mean, there was nothing around me except agriculture. Some crops, and then miles and miles and miles of feedlots. And you didn't even see cattle. You didn't even see them. There were no individual animals out there. You just saw the generic object of a feedlot. You know what I mean? Cows didn't have rights. Cows basically weren't living creatures according to the mentality that you adopt growing up in that environment. Okay, here we go. I'm rambling again. The only takeaway is that agriculture is not nature. So if you are a steward of the land as we have accepted it, that means that you are selfishly cultivating your own products for your own profit. That's it. And people want to talk about, oh, they're feeding the people. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Even if they do feed a handful of people in our wasteful food industry, hardly any of that food makes it to anyone's table. So please shut up about feeding people. But the real point about shutting up about feeding people, they didn't get into it to feed people. They got into it because they're now massive landholders and are continuing to expand the family empire. There's no compassion or love for human beings. What they do for a living kills the planet. And you call them stewards of the land for continuing that destructive practice of stealing water from what was once a healthy, functioning system. You praise them for extirpating native animal species. You praise them for sending into extinction, functional extinction, the native plants. You praise them for continuing to grow and extract from the land. You praise them for growing an impossible number of commodity animals on land that was never meant to handle that sort of abuse. You praise them for this so that they can go and get a paycheck at the end of the day, and you call that stewardship. That's it for today.